let's start learning that the ability to respond means that stimulus and response are not tightly coupled, or they don't have to be, right? So I even sometimes do this. I say in between stimulus and response is a space, right? And in that space is choice, right? But that means that I have to be willing to examine my mind. I have to be willing to see a stimulus. Oh, look, the road's closed, there's construction, and there's a detour. I didn't plan on this, right? Those darn city engineers, right? There's stimulus response. Versus, oh, I'm bigger than this problem. I can figure this out. It doesn't have to ruin my day to take a detour to get to work.
Welcome to the Manifested Wellbeing podcast. I'm Leandro, your host. Today's guest is Christopher Avery. Christopher is a leadership coach and author, supporting leaders and leadership teams looking for a better, more productive way to live and lead. He is the author of the book, The Responsibility Process, Unlocking Your Natural Ability to Live and Lead with Power. Christopher, thank you very much for being here today.
Leandro, thank you. I'm honored.
Amazing. Let's start then. Could you please, if you could start with you talking about your experience as a leadership coach?
Certainly, thank you. So my experience as a leadership coach started decades ago, trying to help smart engineers and software developers and project managers, trying to help them learn how to build and lead teams. And I was fascinated with collaboration and teamwork. And I had the experience once of being able to interview 100 engineers as part of a failed program at a big oil company that was prided themselves at only hiring the top 10% of the graduates of the top 10% of the engineering schools in the world. So that was their definition of success, is we hire the smartest people. And I got to interview all these people, and I said, to what do you attribute your participation in this failed program? And they said, to a person, they said, I guess I got put on a bad team. Mm-hmm. And it struck me so deeply in the middle of the night one night as I was thinking about these answers. And I said, people at work feel like they do not have any power about their relationships and their conditions and their situations at work. And these are the smartest people in the world. And so my early thinking about leadership is that leadership starts with self-leadership. And then it moves to peer leadership, right? So it starts with personal responsibility. Can I change my own world? Right? Can I change my own situation? Can I change my own experience of my workplace? And then after that, can I create a shared responsibility situation with someone else to work on something bigger than either of us? And so I was trying to understand and teach people shared responsibility and shared leadership in teams and peer networks, because, you know, decades ago we saw this coming when we were all going to be working in peer networks, which is where we are today, Leandro. And but what really struck me was that 95 or 99% of all leadership is self-leadership. How can I dare to call myself a leader of others if I don't know how to get myself to freedom, power, and choice, if I don't know how to get myself to where I want to go? Yeah. So that's my experience as a leadership coach. Is I think that for decades I've seen most leadership gurus define leadership as influence, and I have never liked that. To me that invites unethical behavior or manipulative or controlling behavior on the part of people in power to try and get other people to do something. And I believe what's more powerful is if I feel a sense of ownership for some change in the world, if I feel a sense of ownership for some initiative or mission or problem or solution space, and it's bigger than me, and I know how to attract other people to me to help do it, and I'm congruent in my values, and I'm integrous or operate with integrity, and I operate with responsibility, then to me that's a much more powerful leader than someone who tries to connive or control or manipulate in order to influence other people. So that's, in a nutshell, that's my experience as a leadership coach.
So there are two words that I take out of this answer. Is one thing was self-leadership, and another word is influence that those gurus they were focusing on. So I'm thinking about you see on your work with large corporations and institutions. If you could expand a little bit more when think about the concept of leadership and the corporate world, besides self-leadership and ownership, were there other attributes or a set of main attributes that make a good leader? I would think first for the corporate world, and how can this extend in the personal level as well?
Yeah, well, there's no difference between the personal and the corporate in my mind. Yeah. And in terms of attributes, people are always writing books and publishing lists of the characteristics or the attributes of a great leader. And I have a background as a scientist. So what I know is in the leadership is the great man approach to leadership, where we can define the characteristics or the attributes, that has been totally debunked. There is no one consistent list of the traits of a good leader from science. So what makes a good leader in one context or one situation might be different than what makes a good leader in another one. So instead, the research that has been very promising on leadership is state research, so mental state. So they call it trait versus state. And state research says that that we all operate in different mental states. And there are mental states where we are less resourceful and mental states where we are more resourceful. And so, if we were to do a simple exercise like, slump in your chair and slump your shoulders and put a frown on your face and sad eyes and look down, you're probably going to have a thought of feeling kind of depressed, right? And that can just be seen as being a state, right? And if you sit up straight and take a big breath and put a smile on your face and look the other person in the eyes, right, then that might be a state of being engaged and aware and alive, right? So the work that I do is about trying to help people understand that these different states are available to all of us all the time. And some of us don't help us lead ourselves or anybody else. And some of us help us lead ourselves much better. And what's cool is that when you lead yourself really well, doing important things with high values, you shouldn't be surprised to look around and see other people following. Yeah.
That's great. If I take something from your answer, is that in terms of attributes, there are not a specific set of attributes, because a good leadership, it would depend on the current, let's say, the current social cultural environment, and depending on the cultural environment, there will be a leader that will better fit for this specific context. Is that assumption correct, sir?
Sure. There's a theory that's been very powerful and had very large corporate and commercial impact called situational leadership. by Ken Blanchard. And the idea of situational leadership is that there's two ideas. One is that if I'm your leader, I need to lead you according to the situation that you're in, and I may lead you differently than someone else that's reporting to me. But there's another aspect of situational leadership, and that aspect is that often the leader emerges from the group. So we may say, okay, we've got this situation, and let's identify who we want as a leader, and then go find that person and let's install them as the leader in that situation. And that often fails, right? We go hire exactly who we think is going to be the right person. We put them in that situation, they fail. But then in the interim, somebody steps up who's already over there, and they're a perfect fit. But we wouldn't have chosen them. So the idea of situational leadership is something that I value very much, and the way I do it in my company is that I'm the leader of the vision in our company, and that's probably what I do best, overall purpose and vision. But I'm not very good at operations, and I'm really not great at strategy. And so, I hire really smart people who love the vision and love me, and then I turn into a follower often. And so to me, situational leadership in this sense is we take turns leading and following within the same group. Some people just have the energy and are in the right headspace at the moment to emerge and take us where we need to go in this meeting or in this hour or in this quarter. And then, someone else might emerge and do that. So I believe more in mental states and in situational leadership than I do in trying to figure out and identify the traits and the person and, putting one person in charge.
Okay. And could you talk about the importance of responsibility in leadership?
I believe that leadership is responsibility, period. So I believe that leadership means feeling a sense of ownership for some problem or opportunity. And if that problem or opportunity is bigger than you, then attracting other people to you in order to overcome the problem or achieve the opportunity. So I think that good leadership is, and this might be a little complicated, so follow me here, Leandro's audience. I believe that we have idolized leadership, and we've tried to make leadership a main effect. And that a leader should be a leader no matter what they're asked to do. And I just don't believe that is what's really going on. I believe what's really going on is that leadership is a consequence, it's a side effect of somebody being in pursuit of a goal and requiring help to get there. Right? So I don't think that somebody should strive to be a leader. I think that somebody should strive to be in pursuit of owning a problem space, of owning a goal, of owning a change. And then they learn that it's bigger than they are, so they need help. So then they get to find out how to accept help. And when they do a good job at that, then we call that leadership. But to me, leadership is a side effect or a second order effect of being in pursuit of a large purpose or a goal or a vision or solving a problem or making a change. So I don't think I ever, maybe when I was younger, I was in Boy Scouts, and you got certain benefits if you were the patrol leader or something. So maybe earlier in my life, I wanted to be a leader. But in my adult life, I don't think I'm doing what I'm doing because I want to be a leader. I think I'm doing what I'm doing because I want to solve a problem. And that problem's bigger than me, and that means I get to attract other people to help me.
It's a very interesting what you say. And to follow up, I had a conversation with Dr. Elijah Milgram and talking about of meaning in life, a meaning of life. And one thing that he said, that life to be meaningful, one basic element is a life with a project, with a purpose. And now I'm just connecting what you said, that leadership is the pursuit of a project, is having a project and I go and carry on. And just, would you have any thoughts about this interpretation of leadership and having a meaningful, purposeful life? If you have thought about if they're connected, how they're connected at all?
Sure. And I want to pick up the thread from the question you asked me before, which I didn't fully answer. And I said leadership is responsibility, period. So the other part of that is that responsibility literally means the ability to respond.
Okay.
And so someone who is, for instance, in a CEO role, right, then that means it doesn't matter what problem there is in the company that's threatening the company. It doesn't matter what's happening in the environment. It doesn't matter what's happening in the culture. It doesn't matter whether they're paying attention to it or not, or whether they want to pay attention to it. They get to own it. All right. So that's why I say leadership is responsibility, period. You don't get to say that wasn't my job, or that wasn't our strategy, or that wasn't supposed to happen. You don't get to say that. You know, when you are, quote, the leader. So my view about that. I think you ask a kind of a philosophical question, and I don't know that there's one right answer to it. I happen to agree with Dr. Milgram, and it's from my own experience. And my own experience is that there is a period in my life when I was successful enough. I was making money, I had food on the plate, had a house, had clothes and a car. But I wasn't fulfilled in the way that I imagined I could be. And I also didn't like the idea. There's something that struck me about having to earn a living that I didn't like very much, right? So sometimes, we could talk about this if you like, sometimes I like to explore the idea that humans are the only species on the planet that have to earn a living, need to have an identification number and a bank account and punch the clock. Yeah, and we call ourselves civilized. And so, you know, I was kind of thinking about the rest of my life, and I challenged myself I challenged myself to a study, a kind of a clearing process, asking if I was using my skills and my abilities to serve the world with my highest value. And that led me to discover that the most important information that I knew and had to share was already right in front of me. And I had been afraid to commit to it. Right? So about commitment, Jack Canfield, the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, he says 99% is a bitch, pardon my language. 100% is a breeze. Right? So Essentially, as long as we're half committed to stuff or as long as we're holding back, life is hard. And why don't we commit to stuff? Well, because we're kind of afraid of whether or not we can do it or live up to it. But I realized during this study that I was doing with myself, and it started to really change me and my beliefs deeply, I realized that for me to be really fulfilled, I probably ought to consider truly committing to this information that I had in front of me that I wanted to share with the world. So this is circling back to, now I had a project, now I had a purpose. I had a worldwide problem, a problem affecting billions of people that I might be able to do something about. Oh, but it's big and it's hard and there's no market, and I'd have to create a market and you know, blah, blah, blah. But so I came to the conclusion that that having a valuable purpose to pursue in pursuit of adding value to others' lives would probably be pretty fulfilling. And it has been. So that exercise was more than 25 years ago.
What's your opinion on in the current environment, and how would you say that how much people value the concept of responsibility? And I would like to know your opinion if you see, okay, we are more on taking responsibility or more on rights and demands, and how, or maybe the way you would like to approach, or maybe on your experience throughout the years, if the pendulum has been going from one side or the other.
Yeah, it's a good question, Leandro. I'm glad that you raise it. I don't invest a lot of time and energy commenting about traditional views of responsibility in society and whether people are coming from a mental state of wanting handouts or being deserving rights, as you say, versus wanting to take responsibility for themselves. That's my belief is that there are lots of commentators and lots of authors who operate in that space. It's already full enough, and I don't have anything to contribute there. And if I did, I'd be laying blame on people. Instead, I have great compassion for the fact that I believe that people are always doing the best that they can. Even those people that we may look at and saying, look at them with their hand out, acting like a victim, believing that they're not being given enough, and that they need to be saved, right, or whatever. So some people would judge those people and call them ignorant or arrogant. And I have great compassion. I think that they're doing the best they know how to do at the moment. So I don't want to comment on the rights and wrongs in society. I want to educate them about the mental states available to them and how they could tap into self-leadership if they want to change their life.
Okay. And when you talk about responsibility, in your book, The Responsibility Process, you make a distinction between being responsible and taking responsibility. What is the difference?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So first of all, I think if you ask most people, they would say that they're a responsible person. And I also write in the book about if you ask people to define responsibility, you're going to have two different definitions for every person you ask. So if I ask 10 people to define responsibility, I'm probably going to have 20 definitions.
Yeah.
So we use the word responsibility very broadly and very generally. But in terms of being a responsible person, be responsible is a challenge that's used by parents and teachers and bosses in most societies as a way to help people learn the ethics and the norms of their society and to demonstrate them, or yes, I'll use the word conform to them. So being a responsible person means staying out of trouble, staying in school, completing your education, getting a good job, becoming part of a family unit, and contributing to society. And that's what we generally mean in most countries by being a responsible person. So it means having generally good and wise morals and fitting in. Taking 100% responsibility is different. So taking 100% responsibility means taking ownership of your life, taking ownership of your mind, taking ownership of knowing that whatever you're experiencing in the world, you're creating it through your own filters, through your own perceptions, even if you don't want to admit yet that you've created those filters and created those perceptions. So when people say take 100% responsibility, what they mean is that if there's anything in your life, anything in your reality, anything in your experience that you don't like, there's only one person who can change it, and that person can change it. Right? And so one of the things I've learned in my career of studying the psychology of responsibility, how it works in our minds, is that we can appear to be a very responsible person and yet be full of unhappiness and victimization and complaining about our reality, and not admit that we're creating our own reality and not think that we can do anything to change it. Right.
Okay. If I understand well, I'm thinking on being responsible. What you say is, it makes me think about moral responsibility, which is being morally responsible for the consequences of an action when acting out of free will, or maybe due to a sense of duty, like having moral obligation to perform an action under certain circumstances. If that is correct, would you say, or could you expand on any problems when we focus too much on being responsible in this context?
Well, sure. So I think one problem is that we can make ourselves, we slow down our learning, we slow down our ability to accumulate wisdom and to put wisdom to use. So for example, we teach as a society, we teach that people should do what they're supposed to do even if they don't like it. Right? So we happen to call that the mental state of obligation. Obligation is when we're operating from a state, a mental state, where we think that we have to be something we don't want to be. We have to do something we don't want to do. We have to put up with some set of consequences that we don't want to put up with. We feel trapped. We feel that life is a burden. We feel that we have no choice. Right? Yet, we've been reinforced our whole life to do this. Do what you're supposed to do. Do what you're told. Stick it out. I don't care if you don't like it. Right? A responsible person follows through. So we learn that obligation is the way to be a good person. And yet, in the mental state of obligation, we see all responsibility as a burden, not as a freedom. We don't experience choices. We don't experience our own power to create change. All we experience is a life of drudgery. And I believe that, and what does that lead to? Well, in the workplace, it leads to disengagement. It leads to just punching the clock, just showing up and doing the bare necessity to not get fired. Because if I don't have a job, I don't get a paycheck, right? And I need a paycheck, therefore I have to have a job. So, you know, the statistics on disengagement, you probably know them better than I do, Leandro. For a long time, it said 60-some% of people at work were actively disengaged. I saw something recently that said 85%. Well, what do you think drives that active disengagement? People showing up and feeling powerless. And maybe because they were very well conditioned, very well trained their entire lives to live a life of obligation. So I hope that answers your question of giving you an example of how we can be very moral, you know, but have negative consequences.
Yes, it does. So, in this case, and following this line of thought, what would be the first step or first steps a person would take if this person wants to take more responsibility in life now in the present moment?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a little biased, but I think the first step is to understand that your mind offers you many mental states, and some of them are powerless, states of powerlessness. And some of them are states of being powerful. And so I would become a student, a little bit of a student of how the mind works. Because, you know, I guess taking 100% responsibility means taking responsibility for my mind and for how my mind works and for the content of my mind and for what I'm putting in it. And for the beliefs and the values that I'm using for processing my experience. And if I simply say that I am the way I am because of the parents that raised me in the neighborhood I grew up in and the religion I grew up in, and it made me, you know, it screwed me up, but I'm not willing to examine it and change it, right? Then I get to stay screwed up. But if I'm willing to understand that my mind offers me different mental states in response to my emotions and stimulus, and some of those mental states are negative and some are positive, and maybe I can start doing something about noticing that. So, you know, that's the lead into the responsibility process. But what it says is that, you know, my study of the psychology of responsibility says that we all have available to us a very resourceful, very powerful mental state where we can make any change, we can produce any result, we can seek any outcome, and nothing can stop us in this mental state. And it's available to all of us all the time. It's just most of us don't know it. And we don't know how to access it. And we've had a life of learning obligation and victimization. And so we do the best we can to get by.
Yeah. I'm thinking here because when things in life they go well, it's relatively easier to take control over the situation and to take control over our thought process. But, you know, any person thinks sometimes we mess up. We're engaged in a project or a task. Something goes wrong, or something goes wrong in life. Could be our direct action or indirect, or anyway, but things they go wrong. And what would be, and then there's time that there's stress, there's we don't know what to do, and then if we are conditioned, even if we are in the process of trying to get out of this conditioning, but when in the times of stress and we have all this conditioning, so it is difficult to keep a healthier, let's call it a mentally healthier thought process. So what would be the thought process we need to have, like, in order to apply the responsibility process under stressful situations, let's say?
Yes, well, responsibility has always been about how we respond. So one of the cool things about discovering the psychology of responsibility is looking at the wisdom literature of the last 2,000+ years and seeing that the way the great philosophers wrote about responsibility, and then the existentialists and others, is the message over and over and over is that what's important in life is not what happens to you, it's about how you respond to what happens to you. It's not about how many times you fall down, it's about how many times you get up. Right? It's not about how many mistakes you make, it's about how much you correct and learn and improve. So the word is so cool in itself. Responsibility means the ability to respond. Right? And what that means is that we have a place in our mind where we can respond to anything, right? Which means we can take ownership of anything, any problem, any challenge, any hurdle, any situation, any insult, any wound or limitation. We can take ownership of it because we have the ability to respond to anything. Stephen Covey, the great people developer, was very fond of the work of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was the concentration camp survivor who was a neurologist and a psychiatrist. And Viktor Frankl taught Covey, in between stimulus and response is a space. And in that space is choice. And in that choice is freedom and power. Right? So we live a world of autopilot today. You and me and all of my clients, we have all these programs that we've installed, or they came installed when we were born. And it's kind of autopilot decisions, right? Like, I'll never trust an engineer again, or I'll never date a blonde again, or I'll never eat anything green again, or whatever, right? And these things get installed as programs, and then they control us. So there's no space between stimulus and response. We live a very reactive life, and something happens and we react to it. And so what I teach in the responsibility process is, let's start learning that the ability to respond means that stimulus and response are not tightly coupled, or they don't have to be, right? So I even sometimes do this. I say, in between stimulus and response is a space, right? And in that space is choice, right? But that means that I have to be willing to examine my mind. I have to be willing to see a stimulus. Oh, look, the road's closed, there's construction, and there's a detour. I didn't plan on this, right? Those darn city engineers, right? There's stimulus response. Versus, oh, I'm bigger than this problem. I can figure this out. It doesn't have to ruin my day. to take a detour to get to work. Right? And then you just start applying that to everything in your life that causes you the least bit of upset or unhappiness or anxiety or frustration or anger or fear. Stimulus response. You look at your own response and say, oh, what's going on here? Right? I don't think I want to blame. I don't think I want to tell stories. I don't think I want to beat myself up. I don't think I want to be an obligation. I think I want to find a different solution. So that's the first thing, and the responsibility process is a tool that helps you learn that. Right? So should I explain the responsibility process?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is something that I call myself the third member of the research team. So this actually started probably in the 60s with a guy named Marshall Thurber, who's a brilliant, brilliant man. And then my mentor, Bill McCarley, took up the mantle really in the 80s and is doing what I call a phenomenological study, which means taking various copious notes of how clients said that they were powerless and couldn't make change. And so one by one, this chart got created and filled in the various levels on the chart. And so it starts as a stack of words, and you start at the bottom with lay blame, and then justify and shame and obligation and align, and then responsibility. And the psychology that we figured out is that the responsibility process is a pattern that gets triggered every time something goes wrong. So, and what that means, something going wrong, is it means we have two conflicting ideas in our mind that are bashing into each other like a force field. And so in a force field, we have a driving force and a restraining force, and when they come together, we have stuck or stasis, and nothing's moving. And so I love how in life people say, I'm stuck, I have a problem. Right? So the idea here is that we're driving to work and we want to have a nice drive to work. And all of a sudden there's road construction and there's a detour sign, and we weren't ready for that. And we're going to be late. And so now we're having a situation where we want one thing and we have something different. So this conflict in the mind, our definition of a problem, is that we want one thing and we have something different. And that throws off energy or heat. So that's the anxiety or the upset or the frustration. And sometimes men, Leandro in my audience, say, I don't have anxiety. And I say, pissed offness. And they say, oh yeah, I have some of that. Right? And so every time this happens, then the responsibility process gets triggered and our minds go right to the mental state of lay blame. And that is true for all of us. Doesn't matter how smart we are, how wise we are, how conscious we are. I've been practicing responsibility for 28 years, and I haven't gotten rid of the mental state of lay blame. It's still there, ready to be called on every time I have a little upset. Right? I was in a hotel recently, and the alarm had been set by somebody else who had stayed in the hotel. I hadn't checked it, and it went off at 4 a.m. Right? Do you think I had a little lay blame? When I woke up at 4 a.m. and there's the alarm going off, right? And my first thought was, who did that to me? Right? So I'm not immune to this. None of us are. However, in the mental state of lay blame, what's very fascinating to me is that only one logic is available to you, and that logic is, I'm a victim, and somebody did it to me, right? And so then the conclusion of that logic is that somebody else must change for me to be happy or for my problem to go away. And so the way that this works is if we agree, if we buy the answer our mind gives us, then we might stay in blame, and we might use our intellect and our skills and our training in order to prove that somebody else has to change in order for our problem to go away. And if for some reason we decide to not buy the answer our mind gives us, if we decide to not stay in the mental state of blame, all we have to do is say to ourselves, right, that's not a very resourceful answer to blame. Then what happens is we leave blame and we graduate up to the next mental state, which is justify. Justify is identical in every way to blame, except the content in justify is a set of circumstances or situation or a gestalt or a milieu instead of an entity, instead of a person or a team or a company. It's the economy, it's the weather, it's politics, it's the culture around here. So in justify, it's a story about why we can't have what we want, that our life can't change until out there changes. And the action is the same. The action is to realize that I'm telling myself a story, and in this mental state, the only logic available to me is to be a victim of my circumstances and to wait for the circumstances to change. And so I can either do that, or I can decide to stop telling myself a story. Just stop justifying. And when we do that, Leandra, then we graduate to the mental state we call shame. And shame is often experienced as guilt. And all this is lay blame on self for having made a mistake or for having gotten ourselves into a problem. So we also call shame pseudo-responsibility because, like obligation, most societies teach us and reinforce us for beating ourselves up for making a mistake. And we use shaming as a control device to give other people anxiety and get them to do something to conform to what we want. So we know that shame is a very effective mental state in terms of amplifying anxiety. And what we've discovered is that it's not responsibility at all. It's just lay blame on self. And there's a very tragic assumption in the mental state of shame or guilt, and that assumption is there's something wrong with me. Right? There's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm not good enough. And we know that that's a fallacy. Right? It's a fallacy because we know that everybody has resourceful mental state available to them where they can overcome any challenge. So shame is a very pernicious, very powerful mental state, and it's one that we call being a responsible person. So a large part of my work is helping smart professional people learn to undo a lifetime of shame that they've been conditioned to live in. And then if we decide to stop beating ourselves up, then the next mental state is obligation, and we've already talked about obligation. The obligation is feeling trapped in a promise or a commitment. So when we're in this mental state, we tend to despise or resent whoever or whatever it is we think has us trapped. So we resent our spouse, we resent the bank that holds the mortgage, we resent our boss or our company, we resent our kids that need us, when we just want to relax in the evening and watch TV and the kids are, requiring us. We resent our elderly parents that now need our attention. And yet what we learn is that if we've been making our own decisions in life for more than 2 or 3 years, Leandro, then we know that we are the architect of our own reality. And therefore, if there's anything in it that we don't like, we only get to look at the architect in order to see who created it, and it's that same architect that gets to refactor it or redesign it. And so when we decide that we don't want to feel trapped, then it's like a door opens in our mind to this mental state that we call responsibility, where we have much more complex reasoning ability available to us. So it's like in lay blame, justify shame, obligation, we have stupid, silly logic available to us. And in responsibility, we have amazing, creative, generative, problem-solving abilities available to us. So what my work is simply to help people understand how their mind is built and how their mind responds to problems. And if they want to be smarter, if they want to be wiser at will, then they can learn how to use their mind's natural abilities to move quickly from blame to responsibility in order to change anything, in order to grow. So that's the responsibility process. It's a psychological pattern that's based on research that's only a few decades old. And for me, it remains mind-blowing about how powerful it is as a tool.
Thank you very much, Christopher. This conversation has been enlightening. I would like to ask the final questions. That's it is tradition here. I will start asking, what is your favorite book?
My current favorite book is Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins.
Why?
Dr. David Hawkins is my favorite scientist and favorite spiritualist. So he had hugely successful psychiatric practice in New York City, employing 50 psychologists and psychiatrists. And he experienced spontaneous enlightenment and disappeared from society, as people do who have that experience. But he came crawling back. He didn't want to leave society. And he set up what became a decade-plus long experiment in Sedona, Arizona, where he used muscle testing, kinesiology, to explore and discover a database of consciousness. So essentially, we can answer any yes-no question about the present or the past. When we speak truth, our muscles go strong. So muscle testing is calibrating muscles, and when we speak a lie, we go weak. So if I were to say my name is Alice, there's actually a biochemical reaction that goes on in my body that makes me weaker. And when I say my name is Christopher, there's a biochemical reaction that keeps me strong. Well, we're also surrounded by a database of consciousness, which is based on quantum physics and the idea of the universe being folding back on itself. Can't think of the word right now. But we can ask the question, what did the Queen of England have for breakfast on Tuesday? Right? Was it eggs? Was it oatmeal? Was it, whatever? And you can have a room full of people that are calibrated to do this, and they will align on the right answer, and you can verify it, and it's true. Right? So this man has done amazing work to figure out the physics of consciousness.
I'll check this out.
Yeah.
I'll check this
So
out. Yes.
The first book of his that I read is called Power versus Force.
Yeah.
But the more recent book is called Letting Go. And letting go is a responsibility practice in that we can let go of fears, we can let go of judgments, we can let go of attachments, we can let go of aversions, we can let go of emotions. And so that's what letting go is all about. Letting go of the power of surrender, I think, is the subtitle.
Great. What is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie. I gave this some thought, and I'm not a huge movie guy. I like movies, but I kind of treat them like popcorn, just kind of passing by entertainment. But if let's say I could only have one movie to watch again for the rest of my life, what would it be? Nothing's coming to me. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe I'll keep thinking.
It's good. Your favorite or one hobby you enjoy?
Yeah. I'm a roadie. I'm a cyclist. I love bicycling.
Okay.
So I try and ride about 100 miles a week.
That's very good. An inspirational person?
Buckminster Fuller. Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah, he's one of the most prolific inventors that ever lived, and he was an abject failure at the age of 37, and living in Chicago and having a bankrupt brick company. And he tells the story of the middle of the night, January, took himself to the shore of Lake Michigan there in Chicago. And he wrote that he was going to swim until he could swim no longer. So he didn't actually say that he was going to take his life, but that was the implication. Yeah. And he heard a voice in his head as he's standing there on the beach tell him that you do not belong to you, you belong to the universe. You do not have the right to take your own life. And he conceived of a 50-year plan to be in service to all humanity for the rest of his life. And the first 2 years, he did an inventory of his thoughts and his beliefs. And he said, my head is full of fallacies that I was taught by well-intended parents and teachers. So he decided to do his own empirical inventory of his mind. And then he became the most prolific inventor who's ever lived. And did all of this between 40 years old and about 85 or so when he died. Amazing man.
Amazing. A place you would like to visit?
Bali. I love the tropics. I love the Caribbean. And so I've never been, except for Hawaii, I've never been in the South Pacific. So I'd love to explore.
Right. And my last question, if you could complete, please. A meaningful life for me is?
A meaningful life for me is experiencing joy and love and peace, and reflecting that so that others can experience it too.
Christopher, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast, Leandro.